What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Heel Report, part of Tar Heel 24/7, and another edition of our Three Things podcast following UNC basketball's 97-53 win against North Carolina Central. I'm Ryken Fuller. Alongside me is Andrew Jones, live from the Dean E. Smith Center. Not across the court from me tonight. We're a decent amount of miles away from each other right now, but we're still here, still giving you the three things and the largest margin of victory on the young season for the Tar Heels in a 44-point victory against NC Central. Andrew, open us up just a little bit. This is another one of those games. It's an out-of-conference. Again, it's the largest margin of victory in the season. These are the kind of games you don't always know what you're going to get out of. What are some things that stood out to you from the game today, just sort of the things we learned and the things that might have been interesting to have seen?
When you see a game, when a team like Carolina matches up with a club that it's outmanned significantly, you can somewhat see tendencies of preferences. What do they like to do? Because it's their lot, so they're going to keep doing it. And it's clear that one of the things this club loves, and it has two big guys very capable of doing, is the high-low between Henry and Caleb. We saw it a lot early. Caleb got buckets because of Henry. Henry got a bucket or two because of Caleb. And what happens is it's not just what they're able to contribute off of the high-low stuff. It just opens up so much stuff. I talked to Luka after the game, and he just said everything opens up. It's like the defense just sucks in a little bit, and the floor suddenly gets bigger for the offense. And that's something that I think Carolina wants to do in every game. So when it happens naturally and it happens so easily and so willingly and so comfortably in a game like this, it's part of who they want to be. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So I think that there's value in pulling things like that from games like this, as there are other values as well. One of the other things this club likes, they like catch and shoot threes. And they like to find each other, and they like to share the ball, and they like to give up good to great. I know we were going to talk a little bit about assists later on, which we will, but the willingness for good to great, I think, is something that this club has shown early on, more so than Hubert's previous teams. That is something that Hubert talks about a lot. Good to great, good to great, good to great. We got to work on good to great. You'll hear it in December. You heard it last year in January. You heard it last year in February, and they started doing that some when they had that six-game win streak last year. It's the middle of November. This club is playing against a team that each one of these guys could probably take off the dribble and score a ton if they wanted to, and good to great mattered. So the high-low between the bigs, the good to great, those are two things 100% there. The other thing is rim protection. Hadn't been a lot of rim protection around here for a while. Even Armando was a space protector, but he wasn't a great rim protector. What you have now are two guys that can block shots on the ball and off the ball. Henry's probably better off the ball, but in a game like this, going up against smaller bigs, he was able to get some blocks on his man. But it's also the recovery block from Henry that I love. He's not super thick, and sometimes he's going to get beat on a hip or something like that, but he has recovery ability because of his ability to follow the ball. He's kind of like a laser on the ball, and he blocks the shot. So even if he gets beat, he doesn't fully get beat until the other guy scores. So we saw some of those things tonight as well. And I guess the other thing I'm going to say that we saw that's part of this team is they've gotten, and we're going to talk about zone here in a minute, but they've had opportunities to see a lot of different defenses. They've seen some pressing. They saw Radford throw several different defenses at them. Kansas tried some different things, and they appear to be able to adapt fairly easily on the floor. If Hubert calls out and says, hey, they're in a 1-3-1, they kind of know what to go into right away, which is not very common this time of year, especially when they probably only have about 65% of everything put in. It takes time over the course of the year, and a lot of what coaches put in depends on what they see once the season actually starts. So I think their ability to adapt on the fly is another thing that we saw again tonight. I understand it's an outmanned opponent, but these are things that are up here that translate to down here that this team is showing that they have, and there's no reason it doesn't travel with them for the rest of the season.
The first thing as well to think about is the fact that last game UNC saw that zone defense that you were talking about a little bit with Radford, and it definitely threw them off their rhythm for a little bit. There's no doubt about that. They had a couple stretches during that Radford game that were a little rough. Their percentage was just, they just weren't finding the shots that they had been finding in rhythm. Today was very different because even though it seemed like sort of a sluggish first half or start to the first half again, in terms of scoring, they stayed on the plus side of 50% shooting because they often found a lot of those gaps in the zone that NC Central was playing. So it seems like there's a degree of learning and finding out how to attack these zones. A lot of the time it was with the dunk, with the feed down into the post, and just finding a way to just get those bigs involved. So playing against the zone again, Andrew, what did you see from your perspective of just kind of how this team attacked it with that with the big action and sort of how they were able to dissect it, and they ended up shooting well over 50% from three.
You want to dissect the zone. You want to dissect
absolutely.
the zone. And I thought that they were like taking off a leg and maybe some of the abdomen today, and they were leaving the rest of the frog on the table, right? The old biology class when you're dissecting frogs. I don't think they completed a lot of that early. They recognized but didn't always complete it. Hubert told us after the game that Central had 15 touches, had 15 hands on the ball in the first half, and Carolina had 10 turnovers. I don't think they turned it over in the second half, and there were really no touches. In fact, I think it was 6 steals by Central in the first half, and it led to some baskets, and that's a trouble. I remember Kansas had 17 points off turnovers in the first half. This team has been a little slow offensively in the first half the last 3 games, and I think part of it is just they recognize, but sometimes you kind of got to knead dough a little bit before things start to work, and they need to be a little bit better and more efficient and be able to stack buckets more in the first half than they have in the last 3 games until the latter end of the half. They closed 10-1 today. They closed 22-9 against Radford. I think they had a good close against Kansas, even though this team is terrible. When they had the last possession of the half and Hubert calls the use it or lose a timeout, and they don't seem to get good stuff. They got a falling off-balance 3 by Jonathan Powell today that certainly wasn't what Hubert drew up. Well, that's a different topic for a different day.
Yeah, no.
But I thought that they struggled on the perimeter some with spacing and movement and maybe recognition. And one of the things I talked to Derek Dixon about after the game was about sharing the ball, how willing this team is to go from good to great, and how usually how ready they are when they catch the ball to do something with it, shoot, dribble, pass right away. The ball doesn't stick. But at times in these last 3 games, the ball sticks in the first half. And I guess it takes them a while to sort of feel things out. And then, boom, they kind of go into a higher groove, a higher pace groove, and the ball doesn't stick as much. So if we're going to pick at stuff, I guess that's something to pick at. But what I like is how they're self-adjusting. They adjust in these games. It isn't like they go into a game, the zone throws them off. They're able to get the ball in the middle, but then they can't find stuff on the perimeter after that. They do find those things. They just maybe got knocked down shots a little sooner, earlier in games, and maybe get better looks. And maybe the re-entry. One of the things I think I'd like to see when they play against zone defenses is when the ball comes out from Henry or whoever's at the 5, get it back in. I like to see a quick repost, even though they're kind of a high post. Henry can play the high post. There's a lot of stuff he can do there. They got that baseline game with either Caleb or obviously Jaron as well, if he's the 4. And honestly, I think that there's some stuff there with Jonathan Powell. If he's the 4, if you're going to re-entry pass into the middle against the zone. They're going to face zones this year because I think teams are probably going to believe that's a way to sort of bottle up Henry and or Caleb. But I also think it's going to be a mistake. You got to have to man those guys, and you're going to have to keep them from getting passes, because once they get the ball, they're going to be very, very effective. And when you play a zone, I just think the way this team's made up, its ability to hit threes, its ability to go in stretches where lots of different guys can hit threes, I think in the end, the zone is probably going to be a flawed approach. And that's good, because they might do enough now to show opponents, you know what, I'm going to have second thoughts about that. Because I think if this club faces man throughout the course of the year, everybody would rather face man, even a really good man. You'd rather face it. And I think that that's what they're going to need more work on moving forward. Really good man. They're going to face a really good man defense when they play St. Bonaventure and Michigan State and Fort Myers. And they'll be physical man-to-man defenses. So that will be the next lesson for these guys to see how they handle that. But look, if you could beat a zone various zones, if you can beat pressure, full court pressure, and if you can beat man, that means you're a really good offensive team. I think this club has the makeup to be a really good offensive team, to sort of present the choice for the opposition and basically pick your poison. But they do need to start a little bit faster offensively. I like to see a little earlier spacing and recognition and a little bit more juice early in games.
Yeah, and I want to check myself on a stat here. They were just over 50% on the game for shooting, and they shot 47% from three in the second half, kind of as you were talking about opening up some more of those looks. But the main thing was the turnovers in the first half. It was 10 total in that first half to none in the second. Yeah. It was just, and obviously when you're not turning the ball over, you get more chances to shoot, and everything just becomes more in rhythm. And, as you were saying, just sort of the talent difference, just the way that kind of breaks down. Trying to run
turnovers, right? And turnovers so often aren't just the guy with the ball that turns it over. It's his teammates that contribute to the turnover. They don't get open. They don't come off a screen hard enough. They don't pop out. They don't make themselves more available. That happens an awful lot too. And I think that's part of the problem that I was talking about in the first half. In the second half, and Hubert got on them at halftime at Radford as well. I think they had one turnover in the second half against Radford. When they have better spacing and they make themselves more available, then you're going to get better looks. If you spread out more, the defense is chasing more. Everything just comes more naturally and fluidly, almost like you're playing in a scenario where there's not much defense. I thought some of the shots they got in the second half today were as if they're running dummy offense. And if you can spread the floor enough, use the space on the floor, and have the unselfishness that you'll see in a practice when a coach does the Gene Hackman, Norman Dale 5 passes before you shoot. This club can do that and get a lot of good looks because everyone's ready. Everyone can score for the most part. And because they do think good to great. So a really good shot might mean there's a great shot, and they do pass that up a lot. Every once in a while, they actually pass up a great shot and don't end up getting a great shot. But you'd rather have that problem right now than the problem of trying to get them to consistently think about, guys, that was an okay shot, but you can get a better shot. That was a real struggle for last year's team. It's not an issue for this year's team so much.
No, and that all ties into this sort of like mental willingness, these sort of mental intangibles that it seems like this team just possesses as a whole. It's your star freshman diving on the ground in a game against NC Central, going for a loose ball. It's just kind of diving out of bounds, trying to save it in a matchup that was already sort of decided halfway through the second half. And it's just all of these intangibles that coming out fast in the second half isn't just getting back in rhythm. It's staying mentally in rhythm. It's staying mentally ready to come back out of that locker room and continue to, kind of push down on the gas pedal, because this NC Central team, you've just got to kind of wear it down. 15 points at halftime, and it turns into just a 44 point victory. So what are some of the things you see from those intangibles, those things that don't really show up on the stat sheet that you've seen through 4 games, and especially tonight, Andrew?
I'll give you a really good example. It was in the first half, and my throat's very dry. I forgot to bring the water out here, so pardon me for clearing my throat a lot. But there was a sequence over here where Henry, actually, I said a few minutes ago about him getting beat initially. He recovered, blocked the shot. It stayed in play, and he was kind of falling, and he tapped it off the guy whose shot he blocked off his leg, and it went out of bounds. There's just an awareness. There's a caginess to this team. Remember, I described Caleb Wilson after the Kansas game of all the amazing physical gifts that he has. He's also gritty and cagey.
Yeah.
Henry Vissar's gritty and cagey. He's not gonna win a logger contest. Those guys that saw giant trees in half and stuff like that. He's not built like that, but he's gritty and he's feisty. He's gonna fight you. And there's some damn elbows. You ever played basketball and you had to deal with a guy with elbows, man? Oh. That drove you crazy. And Henry's got those elbows. He probably drives people crazy. So he's not going to hit a guy to death, but he could elbow, in inadvertent non-foul elbow a guy to the point where he frustrates the crap out of him. And no, by the way, he's going to block the shot every chance he gets. He's going to knock the thing out of bounds off of your leg. He's going to dive for it. He's going to tip it to a teammate. The other night, We were talking about Henry's rebounding numbers, which aren't great. He had 12, I think, 11 or 12 tonight. But I would love to see a stat where Henry keeps balls alive that the Tar Heels rebound. He's really good at stuff like that. So I like that part of this team where you talk about things that aren't stats. Those are things that aren't stats. Caleb's energy, Caleb's ability to just get everybody going. I mean, he's sort of like that dude that when he turns it on, the whole place just illuminates. All the fans, the teammates, the bench, the media, the guys that are selling popcorn, the ushers, everybody just illuminates and everything goes up another notch. And it's still just 2 points. But as I've said before, I think that Caleb Wilson has an ability to block a shot that seems like more than one block shot, to grab a rebound, take a couple of dribbles and pitch it ahead where it just carries more. It means it has a weight on the opponent that maybe it wouldn't if other guys did that. And then, of course, his dunks. His dunks are psychologically worth 3 and 4 points a lot of the time because he had one tonight where I swear he hung out, took pictures, counted people in the seats, and then decided to flush all in the air, but without moving. I'm obviously being facetious. My point is that the hang time was unreal, and I didn't think he was going to dunk it, and all of a sudden, little flush. That stuff gets into the head of opponents, gets in their heads, and it weighs down on them. Then you look at some of the other guys. I thought there were some hustle plays by Jonathan Powell tonight that when the game was way out of line. Obviously, he's trying to win some favor with Hubert. Because I wrote after the Radford game that the guy with the most to gain and perhaps the most to lose during this period with Seth out is Jonathan Powell, because he's going to get a lot of minutes. He's got to do some Seth-like stuff and some Jonathan Powell-like stuff, and we're still learning what the Jonathan Powell-like stuff is. Well, we saw a little bit more of that. I thought he lost himself in the game more tonight than he had in the first 3 games. Same thing for Derek Dixon. And what do you see? You see instincts out there. Derek knocked a couple of threes down. He said I said, you kind of need to see those go down. He said, yeah, I need to see them go down. We all need to see that stuff go down. You need confidence. You could be a supremely talented and skilled player, but you still need confidence because everyone else out on the court is generally confident. So I think there's just a lot of little things about the way these guys approach the game and about what they can do on the court to make up for some of the things they don't have. Like, they're not supremely athletic across the board. They're not baseline to baseline as fast as a lot of Roy's teams were, and maybe not even as fast as the 2022 team was when it got running sometimes. But their ability to kind of get around that with the caginess and the IQ stuff and pitching ahead in the break and not over dribbling, things like that make them very quick, make them athletic, make them fast. And it accentuates the good things that they do. And I think that's one of the takeaways now that I've seen them play twice in person in exhibition, 4 times in all 4 regular season games, seen them in person then too. That's what I'm getting from them. That's what I've seen each time I've watched them play. And we see it a little bit more and more in stretches as well. I know they're playing patsies, although I think Radford's a pretty good team, but you still have to play the right way. I've seen teams that are really good run up huge margins on patsies, and they don't really do it getting anything out of it. I think this team got something out of tonight's game, and that's what you want when you have these opportunities.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that one thing about Seth. Just a quick idea is the fact that this guy kind of personified grit and that intangible mindset for Carolina for the last couple of years is out with injury. And it's just who's going to not only fill that role in terms of production on the court, but just mentally add a leadership and just sort of that sort of grit aspect that he brings to the team. But interesting to see how that'll play out the rest of the season as well, and until he comes back healthy. And
it's opportunity. This is Jonathan Powell's opportunity.
Absolutely.
I think we saw Luke at the 1 a little bit tonight, which I think we're going to see more and more of. I've been talking about that. It's a process. And one thing came up tonight too on press row when Central was trapping some. I would love to know if they ever trapped in the Adriatic League, the Adriatic League where Luka played. I don't know how many double teams and traps and full court traps and pressures and scrambles he ever faced. So there are. He said the other night there are some terminology and stylistic differences to basketball here than where he played, and he's adapting to that. So the people that are kind of wanting him, hey, where's this 30-point Luka guy? we suspect that he's going to pop off at some point. I told Jacob the story the other night about Phil Ford telling me, hey, he's going for 35 somewhere. They're probably going to do it a couple of times. But it's a process for him, too. And I actually think that's a great thing because you don't want it all popping off in November, man. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And there's time to add these things. And I'd like to see a little more Luke at the point against Navy. And then after that, they go to Fort Myers. They won't have Seth then. So maybe see him against some bigger, more athletic, more skilled teams like St. Bonaventure and Michigan State. I think it's something to look at. And maybe we see a little bit more of it each time out because he sees the floor well. He's a willing shooter, but he's also a willing passer. And he's kind of figuring out things with these other guys on the court. And he said, look, I've only played X number of minutes with these guys on the floor in an actual game. I need to play more to figure out basically how I fit in 100%. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's sort of what he was hinting at. So it's 4 games in. There's a whole lot more to learn about this club, but the things we've learned, Riken, are very, very positive.
Absolutely. And Andrew, we're going to go ahead and cap this one off. We got a day in Winston-Salem tomorrow. And trying to get this one a 9 p.m. tip-off, trying to get this one out as quickly as possible here. So
thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna cap it off here. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of our Three Things podcast. Make sure you hit that like button if you liked it. Hit that subscribe button, that bell to get notified on daily content on the YouTube. Head over to TarHeel247.com to check out some daily content there, and subscribe if you want to get access to some premium content. But again, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.